All right, so let's dive into a story that sounds like something straight out of like a political thriller.
Okay.
Donald Trump is back in the news,
Okay.
and
Here we go again.
yeah, right. And this time it's about Greenland.
Really?
I know you're probably thinking, wait, didn't we already do this a few years ago?
Yeah, what is this 2019?
Exactly. You're right. Trump tried to buy Greenland back in 2019.
Yep.
Denmark said no, and everyone kind of had a good laugh about it. But
Yeah.
this time things feel a little bit different.
Oh.
So we've got two news articles that lay out the current situation
Yeah.
and a Reddit thread that is just exploding with global reactions. It's really fascinating.
Oh.
Yeah, it's a fascinating mix of perspectives.
Okay.
So we're going to use this deep dive to figure out why this seemingly outlandish story is making headlines again and what it tells us about how the world works and
Okay.
what you should be paying attention to.
It is interesting that this is resurfacing now, especially with all the other global events unfolding. It definitely seems like there's more to this story than just Trump being Trump.
Okay, so for those who need a quick refresher, what exactly happened?
Yeah.
Well, Trump released a statement that was, shall we say, pretty blunt.
Okay.
He said, "For purposes of national security and freedom throughout the world, the United States of America feels that the ownership and control of Greenland is an absolute necessity."
Oh, wow.
So just like that, we're back in 2019 with Trump wanting to buy an entire country.
And of course, Greenland had something to say about being treated like a piece of property.
Exactly.
For grabs.
Yeah.
Prime Minister Mute Egg responded with a strong statement saying, "Greenland is ours. We are not for sale and will never be for sale. We must not lose our long struggle for freedom."
So we've got a determined Trump and a defiant Greenland.
Yeah.
But before we unpack the motivations and potential consequences of all of this, let's bring in some of the reactions from that wild Reddit thread. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a goldmine of opinions with everything from dark humor to genuine concern.
It'll be interesting to see what themes emerge from those conversations.
Right.
Sometimes those seemingly off-the-cuff remarks can reveal a lot about the anxieties people are feeling.
Absolutely. So one of the first things that jumped out at me was how many people were drawing comparisons to other historical events. Almost like they're seeing a pattern here.
Okay.
For example, Castle Plage brought up the U.S. invasion of Panama and the shooting down of Iranian Air Flight 655.
Those are pretty heavy comparisons.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder what kind of message this sends to the rest of the world.
Right.
If the U.S. can just decide it wants to own another country, what does that say about respecting sovereignty and international law?
Right, and that brings us to another recurring theme in the thread, this idea that the U.S. is stuck in this mindset of everything being for sale.
Oh, really?
Like Schmeckfest 2000 put it, Americans think everything is for sale. Not taking them seriously would be a huge, huge mistake.
That comment is particularly interesting because it suggests a disconnect between how the U.S. sees itself and how it's perceived on the global stage.
Yeah, and then there's the whole national security angle.
Right.
A lot of users like Pongmoy questioned how Trump could even use that term, given his past actions. They pointed to his private meetings with Putin and his handling of classified documents.
What's fascinating here is that this goes beyond just questioning Trump's motives.
Yeah.
It raises a larger question about how the concept of national security is often used to justify actions that may not actually be in the best interests of the people. It's almost like a catch-all phrase that can be used to silence dissent or push through controversial policies.
And this is where things start to feel a bit unsettling.
Yeah.
If we're seeing a pattern of the U.S. prioritizing its own interests, even if it means bending the rules or disregarding the concerns of other countries,
Right.
that has implications for everyone.
Of course.
It makes you wonder, what does this say about the future of diplomacy and international cooperation?
It's a valid concern.
Yeah.
And it's something we'll explore further as we continue this deep dive. But before we move on, let's zoom out a bit and look at the bigger picture.
Okay.
Greenland, with its location and resources, is becoming increasingly important in a world grappling with climate change and shifting power dynamics.
Right.
Could this be about more than just a personal whim on Trump's part?
That's a great point. It's easy to get caught up in the Trump of it all.
Yeah.
But there are larger forces at play here. For example, Pielbauer, you mentioned that new shipping lanes are opening up in the Arctic due to melting ice, which could make Greenland a strategically valuable location for trade and military activity.
And let's not forget that Greenland has vast reserves of natural resources,
Right.
including rare earth minerals that are essential for many modern technologies.
Yeah.
As the global demand for these resources increases, so too does the strategic importance of the Arctic region.
So Trump's interest in Greenland, while seemingly outlandish, might actually be a reflection of some very real geopolitical and economic trends that are reshaping the world.
Mm.
It's almost like he's stumbled onto something that's going to become increasingly important in the coming years, regardless of whether or not he succeeds in acquiring Greenland.
That's an interesting way to put it, and it's something we'll definitely delve into further. But for now, let's shift gears and explore some of the more insightful comments from the Reddit thread. I'm particularly interested in the ones that try to understand the deeper motivations behind Trump's actions and what they might reveal about his worldview.
Okay, sounds like we're about to get into the psychology of Trump and what makes him tick. That should be interesting. Before we go there, though, I'm curious to hear what stood out to you the most from these initial reactions. What surprised you or maybe even made you a little uneasy?
I think what struck me the most was the sense of disbelief mixed with a growing realization that we're in uncharted territory. It's like people are trying to process the fact that something they thought was impossible is actually happening, and they're not sure what to make of it.
That's a great observation, and it's something that we'll definitely keep in mind as we continue this deep dive. We're going to unpack those deeper motivations next. So stay tuned for part 2 of our exploration of this wild and unpredictable story.
So picking up where we left off, there were quite a few comments in that Reddit thread that tried to get inside Trump's head
Yeah.
and figure out what's really driving his obsession with Greenland.
Yeah, it's like everyone's trying to decipher the motives behind this seemingly bizarre move.
One comment that stood out to me was from Outwing, who said, he's so locked down on trying to have a legacy on history books, now he seems pressured and is trying random shit like calling Canada a state the Panama Canal or Greenland.
Yeah.
Even a Mexico intervention.
So they're suggesting that this is all about Trump trying to secure his place in history, even if it means making impulsive or controversial decisions.
Right.
Do you think there's any truth to that?
It's certainly possible Trump has always been very image conscious and concerned with how he'll be remembered.
Yeah.
But I think it's also important to consider this in the context of his broader political ideology.
Okay.
He's consistently framed himself as a disruptor, someone who's not afraid to challenge the status quo and break with tradition.
And this idea of buying Greenland, or even just suggesting it,
Right.
definitely fits into that narrative of being a bold and unconventional leader.
Exactly.
It's like he's trying to make a statement, even if it's not entirely clear what that statement is.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes this so fascinating and frankly a bit unsettling.
Yeah.
We're trying to apply traditional political logic to someone who doesn't seem to play by the same rules.
So how do we make sense of this? If we can't rely on traditional explanations, what other factors might be at play here?
Well, I think one key aspect is understanding Trump's transactional worldview.
Okay.
He sees everything as a deal, a negotiation where there's always a winner and a loser.
So in his mind, acquiring Greenland is just another deal to be made, another asset to be acquired.
Right. And this ties into his approach to foreign policy, which has often been characterized as America first.
Right.
He's skeptical of international institutions and alliances, and he's shown a willingness to act unilaterally even if it alienates allies or undermines global norms.
And this brings us back to that Reddit thread.
Yeah.
And the concerns that people were expressing about the potential consequences of this kind of rhetoric.
Right.
Several users drew comparisons to other world leaders who have used similar language to justify territorial expansion.
You're referring to comments like the one from Sleek, who asked, how is that different from Putin's I want Ukraine?
Right.
That comparison is particularly relevant in the current geopolitical climate,
Right.
where we're seeing a rise in authoritarianism and a weakening of international law.
Right. And it makes you wonder if Trump is normalizing this kind of language, even if he doesn't actually follow through in his threats.
Right. What message does that send to other leaders who might be tempted to pursue their own expansionist ambitions?
It's a dangerous precedent to set, and it's something we need to be very mindful of.
Yeah.
We can't just dismiss this as Trump being Trump.
You're right.
His words have weight, and they can have real-world consequences.
So we've got this complex mix of personal ambition, a transactional worldview, and a disregard for international norms, all converging on this seemingly insignificant island in the North Atlantic.
Yeah.
But as we discussed earlier, Greenland is not insignificant at all.
Right.
It's strategically important, especially as the Arctic becomes more accessible due to climate change.
Exactly. And this is where the story gets even more interesting and perhaps a bit more concerning.
Yeah.
Because while Trump might be motivated by ego or a desire to make a grand gesture, his focus on Greenland inadvertently aligns with a broader geopolitical trend the increasing importance of the Arctic region. Several Reddit users pointing this out, like UberBobo7, who said, the Arctic Ocean is projected to be one of the most lucrative and strategically important regions in this century. And controlling both the Pacific and Atlantic entryways into the Arctic Ocean is quite important for the U.S.'s trade interests.
That comment highlights the fact that we're entering a new era of great power competition, and the Arctic is at the center of it.
Yeah.
As the ice melts, new shipping routes open up, and access to the region's vast resources becomes more feasible.
So even if Trump's motives are questionable, he's stumbled onto something that's going to be a major issue in the coming years.
Right.
It's like he's accidentally tapped into this underlying current of geopolitical tension that's been building for a while now.
Precisely. And this is why it's so crucial to understand the bigger picture here.
Right.
This isn't just about Trump or Greenland. It's about the future of the Arctic, the balance of power between nations, and the rules that will govern this new era of competition.
It's almost like this whole Greenland saga is a microcosm of the challenges we're facing on a global scale. Climate change, resource scarcity, shifting power dynamics, and a growing sense of uncertainty about the future.
And it's a reminder that seemingly isolated events are often interconnected in ways we might not immediately realize.
Yeah.
They're part of a larger story that's still unfolding, and it's up to us to connect the dots and understand the implications.
Speaking of connecting the dots, I want to go back to the Reddit thread for a moment. One comment that really stuck with me was from AshamedSoil7247, who said, what this does is normalize the idea that borders are fluid. Even if the U.S. does not actually annex anything, he's normalizing expansionist speech for other world leaders too.
That's a really insightful point. It's not just about the specific action that Trump takes, but also about the message he's sending and the norms he's reinforcing.
Right. It's like by even putting this idea out there, he's chipping away at the foundation of international law and the idea of respecting sovereignty.
Exactly.
And that has implications for everyone, not just Greenland.
Exactly. And it's a reminder that words matter.
Yeah.
They can shape perceptions, influence behavior, and ultimately have real-world consequences.
So we've talked about Trump's motivations, the geopolitical context, and the potential consequences of this whole Greenland situation.
Right.
But there's one more element I want to touch on before we move on to the final part of this deep dive, and that's the role of the media.
That's a crucial aspect that often gets overlooked.
Yeah.
The way this story is framed and presented can have a significant impact on public perception and ultimately on how events unfold.
Right. And we've seen how quickly this story became fodder for memes and jokes.
Yeah.
Which can sometimes trivialize the very real concerns that it raises.
It's a delicate balance.
Yeah.
Humor can be a coping mechanism and a way to process complex and unsettling events. But it's also important to ensure that it doesn't distract us from having serious conversations about the issues at stake.
So how do we find that balance? How can we stay informed, engage in meaningful discussions, and perhaps even influence the course of events?
I think the key is to be critical consumers of information.
Okay.
We need to be aware of our own biases, seek out diverse perspectives, and verify the information we encounter.
And we need to be willing to have uncomfortable conversations, to challenge our own assumptions, and to recognize that there are often multiple truths at play.
Exactly. It's about embracing complexity, recognizing nuance, and being open to learning from different viewpoints.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground in this second part of our deep dive.
We have.
We've gone from Trump's personal motivations to the broader geopolitical implications of the Arctic, and we've touched on the crucial role of the media in shaping our understanding of these events.
And in the final part, we'll explore what all of this means for the future.
Okay.
We'll look at the potential scenarios that might unfold, the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead, and what you can do to stay engaged and informed in this rapidly changing world.
So stay tuned for part 3 of our deep dive, where we'll wrap up this conversation and leave you with some final thoughts to ponder. Welcome back to our deep dive into this whole world of Trump, Greenland, and this like shifting landscape of global power.
Yeah.
We've unpacked a lot already, from Trump's personal ambitions to the strategic importance of the Arctic.
It's a lot.
It is. Now let's kind of shift gears a little bit and look ahead. What could this all mean for the future?
Yeah.
Not just for Greenland, but for the entire international system.
Right. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And as we've seen from that Reddit thread, people are already grappling with the potential consequences.
Yeah, there were a lot of comments about the impact this could have on existing alliances,
Right.
especially NATO.
Uh-huh.
User I Can Swim Forever commented,
Mm-hmm.
"This seems to me like he's trying to break up with NATO.
Yeah.
If any American believes the U.S. will be safer in a non-NATO world, they need to check their heads."
That comment reflects a broader anxiety that's been brewing for a while now, particularly in Europe. There's a growing sense that the U.S. under Trump is becoming less reliable as an ally, more focused on its own interests, even if it means undermining the institutions that have maintained global stability for decades.
And another user, Skin2N, added, "NATO is 100% a U.S. creation. It made it possible for them to keep and put more military bases all over Europe after WW2. Only a complete nutjob or a Russian agent would want to dismantle that."
There's a lot to unpack in that statement.
Yeah.
It speaks to the historical context of NATO,
Yeah,
its role in the post-World War II order,
right.
and the perception, at least among some, that the U.S. has benefited significantly from this arrangement.
And now with Trump questioning the value of NATO and pursuing a more unilateralist approach to foreign policy,
Yeah,
it's raising serious questions about the future of this alliance
of course.
and the potential for a return to a more fragmented and perhaps even conflict-prone world.
It's a sobering thought,
It is.
and it underscores the importance of understanding the interconnectedness of global events.
Yeah.
What happens in one part of the world, even a seemingly remote place like Greenland, can have ripple effects that are felt far and wide.
And it's not just about NATO. Several users brought up the potential impact on other international agreements and institutions, from trade deals to climate accords.
Mm-hmm.
There's a sense that the rules-based international order that has prevailed for decades is under threat,
Right.
and it's unclear what might replace it.
This brings us back to a point we touched on earlier.
Yeah.
The rise of new global powers like China, which are challenging the existing order and seeking to reshape it in their own image.
Right.
And as the U.S. retreats from its traditional role as a global leader, it creates a vacuum that others are all too eager to fill.
It's like we're at a crossroads with multiple paths leading into the future, and it's not clear which one we'll end up taking.
Yeah.
It's a bit overwhelming, to be honest.
I understand that feeling. It's easy to feel powerless in the face of such large and complex forces.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to remember that we all have a role to play in shaping the future.
That brings to mind a comment from Schmeckfest 2000 who said, "Trump's America is not Europe's friend. This is what evil America looks like when it turns against its former allies. Are we prepared for that? No, we are not. We are still bitching about immigrants 2047.
That comment, while perhaps a bit hyperbolic, does capture the sense of disillusionment and even betrayal that many people are feeling.
Right.
And it highlights the importance of not just reacting to events, but also of proactively shaping the kind of world we want to live in.
So what can we do? What steps can we take to ensure that we're not just passive bystanders in this unfolding global drama?
Well, as we discussed earlier, one crucial step is to become more informed and engaged citizens. We need to understand the issues at stake,
Right.
the different perspectives involved,
Yeah.
and the potential consequences of our actions.
And we need to hold our leaders accountable, demanding transparency, ethical conduct,
Right.
and a commitment to policies that promote peace, cooperation, and sustainability.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we're not just consumers of news, but also active participants in shaping the world around us.
Right.
We have a voice, we have choices, and we have the power to make a difference.
And sometimes it's the small everyday actions that can have the most profound impact.
Right.
Supporting organizations working on issues you care about, making conscious consumer choices,
Yeah.
engaging in respectful dialogue with those who hold different views.
Mm-hmm.
These are all ways to contribute to a more just and equitable world.
It's about recognizing our interconnectedness,
Right.
understanding that our actions have ripple effects, and embracing the idea that we're all in this together.
That's a powerful message. That's a good note to end on. As we wrap up this deep dive into Trump Greenland and the future of global power, we want to leave you with a final thought to ponder.
Okay?
And it's a question that wasn't explicitly addressed in our sources,
Okay.
but it's one that's essential to consider as we move forward. If, as we've discussed, the Arctic is becoming increasingly important in terms of resources and strategic location,
Right.
what role should the indigenous communities who have called this region home for centuries play in shaping its future?
Their voices need to be heard, Their rights need to be protected, and their
Mhm.
traditional knowledge needs to be respected.
Absolutely.
They're the stewards of this land, and their perspectives are essential to ensuring that the Arctic is developed in a sustainable and equitable way.
We've explored a lot in this deep dive, from the seemingly absurd to the profoundly
They
unsettling.
have.
But we've also uncovered some glimmers of hope and a renewed sense of purpose. We hope this conversation has empowered you to stay informed, engaged, and involved in shaping the future you want to see.
Remember, this is just one chapter in a much larger story that's still being written.
Yeah.
The ending is yet to be determined, and it's up to all of us to play our part.
Thank you for joining us on this journey. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring.